Hello, this is Gabriel, custodian of Watchman Privacy. Listen, I know why you're here. You're looking to escape the technocratic apparatuses that you see slowly enveloping you and restraining your freedom. In that case, the best thing you can do before listening to this episode is to visit escapethetechnocracy.com to purchase my privacy course on getting off the grid. This course is for everyone. It's the best privacy tutorial on the internet, and our shop has other things as well, books and toolkits and consulting, and we accept Monero and actual privacy throughout the checkout process. I do not take sponsors. I'm not part of a company. I don't have someone to answer to. So unlike 99.9% of the people who talk about their subject, you can know that I'm pursuing the unmitigated truth as I see it. Go support you and me at escapethetechnocracy.com. Welcome to Watchman Privacy Torchlight Chats. I'm Gabriel Custodian. I'm joined by my colleague Urban, with whom we created our Escape the Technocracy brand. In Torchlight Chats, we discuss things that interest us. It's more conversational than the typical podcasts. Not too conversational. This is not a fireside discussion. Our torch is pointed forward, scanning the horizon. We're always on duty, and thus our watch begins. So Urban, we're talking today about the Lebanon pager explosions. I'll just give a little bit of a summary here for those who want the who, what, when, where. This is from Wikipedia. September 2024, thousands of handheld pagers and hundreds of walkie-talkies intended for use by Hezbollah exploded simultaneously across Lebanon and Syria in an Israeli attack. As of 22 September, 42 people had died, including at least 12 civilians. This incident was described as Hezbollah's biggest security breach since the start of the Israeli-Hezbollah conflict in October 2023. The second wave, just kind of skipping some of the highlights here, the second wave occurred on 18 September, killing at least 30 people and injuring 750. Okay, so 750 injured. The explosions occurred in several areas of Lebanon with the Hezbollah presence, as well as in several locations in Syria. There were chaotic scenes at the 150 hospitals across Lebanon that received victims of the explosions. The Israeli intelligence agency, Mossad, had secretly manufactured the devices, integrated the explosive PETN into the batteries, and sold them to Hezbollah through a shell company. All right, this is Wikipedia. We don't know exactly if this is confirmed. International officials and scholars of the law of war have debated the legality of the attacks, with critics suggesting they might constitute war crimes or acts of terrorism. So I'll just catch my breath here. Urban, what is your first response to this pager explosion? It caught a lot of people off guard. It's a very surprising thing. I think we should be surprised. This is bizarre. Your initial reaction?
Yeah, I remember I was reading Twitter and probably spending too much time on it. And then suddenly, reports appeared about, potentially pager being attacked, like in a cyber attack with some kind of malware designed to trigger their battery to explode. And as we're going to discuss later, it's probably not what happened, and it's probably not the case. But it was just very bizarre. And then you had videos in supermarket in the street of people having just their pager exploding very violently. And then, all the nasty picture of the aftermath, with severe burn and other stuff that we wouldn't even describe to keep this podcast family friendly. But yeah, it was just a very weird, surreal situation. And then 24 hours later, the next day, as everybody was still trying to figure out what hell happened, you had the second wave with walkie-talkie this time that, were just exploding. And since they are a slightly bigger device, creating even more damage and killing more people. And the irony of it is that, some of them even exploded during funerals of people that got killed in the first wave. So it was just a very surreal day. And I was in chat with some of my friends that work in cybersecurity, trying to understand what were we watching, what is this?
Absolutely. And I'm reading again from Wikipedia. While pagers were popular in the late 20th century, they have since largely been replaced by cell phones. Still, some Hezbollah members had used pagers for years before the 7 October attacks, but more members began using them after February 2024, when Hezbollah Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah called on members to stop using smartphones, citing Israel's capability to infiltrate them. Hezbollah subsequently imported the pagers to Lebanon in the months before the explosion. Reuters was told that the explosives were not detected despite checks, and the pagers were still being distributed immediately before the attack. So this is an interesting question. So pagers are actually, for privacy seekers, okay, for privacy seekers, pagers are a desirable thing compared to cell phones, which is part of the reason they switched to them. Why are pagers superior to cell phones for privacy?
Let's discuss a bit on how both of them work. It will help people listening to understand. Pager is a much older technology than cell phone, and what it is basically a device that is constantly listening to radio frequency, and then you can broadcast a message, and it's usually a short text message, and then the pager will, get it and display it on screen. The interesting thing with this way of broadcasting is, in a way, it's a bit like a FM radio. You don't really know who is listening to the FM radio, right? You have people that are just tuning in their receiver, but the receiver itself, in most cases, will not transmit anything back to the radio station. So this way, it's very efficient to send a message because it's a one-way communication. Now, some pager can do two ways communication, but let's ignore that for now. Historically, it has been used mainly for like emergency services in hospital for doctor, nurses, because it's a way, to alert and send notification to people. Yeah, so it's a bit the early technology we had to notify people. And of course, with time, they became more advanced and you could, save in memory, receive different type of notification and etc. Now, cell phone, they work in a very, very different way. So cell phone, to simplify a lot, they all have a serial number, and this serial number, when you turn them on, it authenticates, okay, I'm this cell phone with this number, and they authenticate themselves to the cell tower, and they usually only transmit to one or two cell tower because it's all it's needed. And you have bidirectional communication, and when you send a message to a cell phone, only the targeted cell phone will get the message. I mean, this has some advantage because, only one device is receiving it, but it has also the inconvenience for privacy minded people that indeed, to know where to deliver the message, you need to know where the device is. And if you know where the device is, in most cases, this is also where the person owning the device is. Hamas, during their terrorist campaign against Israel, they suffered a lot of targeted assassination in which basically their members were using regular cell phones, and then through some cyber attack and signal intelligence, they were able to triangulate where those people were, and then to basically, send an airstrike on them. So yeah, they were on their toes, and they were in the process of switching to pagers, which is what was happening a few hours even before this devastating attack that they had.
And obviously a pager also doesn't exactly allow for all the customization of a phone that would really attach it to your name in very personal ways. So good analysis there. The initial reaction by a lot of people when they saw this Urban was to say, basically think that the batteries themselves were made to explode. A lot of people started saying, wait, can they just make any battery explode? I'm near a lot of things with batteries right now. And so that's a terrifying thing. Everybody has something with a battery in it. My understanding, your understanding, we had a discussion about this. Batteries don't exactly do this, right? There have been reports as well that there have been explosives embedded in these devices. It's certainly good for Mossad to instill fear in them by making it think like, hey, it could be anything battery related. They already got them to move away from phones and to pagers. So that's already a win, right? Because a pager is not nearly as useful as a phone. And for people to start thinking, hey, their batteries are exploding, that would cause a lot of people to stop using all kinds of useful tools. We talked to a demolitions expert who refused to comment on the situation, but what is your assessment of whether or not batteries are capable of doing this, or how certain we are that it must be explosives?
Of course, lithium, specifically lithium battery, can do nasty damage. and I've seen some of them, exploding. But the thing is, they don't really detonate. It's more like a very hot, very nasty fire that is extremely hard to stop, and that even in some case with water gets worse. But usually, like if you compare to what happened with Samsung phone a few years ago, it started to become super hot. Then people notice that their phone is becoming dangerously hot, and naturally they will take it out and they will, put on a table or something, and then it will spark, it will do things. The big injury that during the research that we did that we found about batteries is if you have a lot of batteries, so of course, if you have a manufacturing company with batteries and they catch fire, this is like extremely devastating, obviously. Other injury in like modern time, and especially with that, where people in elevator, but not with phone, but with like electric scooters that got the battery pack starting a fire, and then this can reach like several hundred, if not 1,000 degrees, and they basically like got cooked in a very nasty way in an elevator. But the only reason they were like badly injured, and even some of them sadly passed away, is that they were in like a very closed environment, like an elevator, and they were unable to escape, right? Because else you just leave the battery somewhere outside and you run away, and you're fine. But if you look at the videos that we saw from Beirut, those look like very sudden. It looks like a very sudden explosion, very brutal, and it looks like a detonation. And this leads to having been tampered in some way. Now, this is not to say that you could still do damage, right? By somehow forcing the batteries to go in a thermal runway, but it would probably not hurt as much and not cause as many damage as what we have seen.
Right. And here I'm just reading from a couple news sources that confirm what you've said. This is Reuters. The batteries of the walkie-talkies, now we're talking about the walkie-talkies, used by Lebanese armed group Hezbollah that blew up, were laced with a highly explosive compound known as PETN. A Lebanon source familiar with the device's components told Reuters. I think this is from BBC. So these pagers, this is quoting Mike Hipponen, a research specialist at the software company With Secure and a cybercrime advisor to Europol, says, quote, these pagers were likely modified in some way to cause these types of explosions. The size and strength of the explosion indicates it was not just the battery. The Wall Street Journal cited a source as saying that affected devices were from a new shipment that Hezbollah had received in recent days. A Hezbollah official also told the newspapers some people had felt the pagers heat up before the blasts. And so we have seen, you shared a video with me, somebody seemingly making a iPhone explode in a pretty serious way. But so there is some question about whether this is a possibility. And if it is possible to explode batteries like this remotely, of course, we need to acknowledge that this needs to have some kind of trigger. That would be pretty terrifying. Do you admit that is still a possibility, Urban?
I mean, of course, we need to wait an investigation. I don't really know due to the nature of the people that were targeted. I'm not sure if we will get a public report of what happened. I think due to the severity of the wounds, it's very unlikely. But for sure, you could imagine a very similar attack that only uses battery and still burn people and still cause a lot of chaos and still is like a major event.
And affects maybe every single human instead of a select group who was using these particular pagers.
Yeah, or all the people who have a specific model of a phone or something like this. So I would not entirely discount such a possibility. And I mean, I let the listener get their imagination a bit wild, but imagine what you could do in a Tesla, knowing that all the doors are electronic controlled and there is just a massive battery. Probably you could force even someone to close all the windows and the doors and then trigger a fire. And then because they cannot escape, that would be devastating. So, you shouldn't underestimate. Still, you can do damage even if it's only batteries. But yeah, I think this attack just showed a taboo that is kind of like a new step in the art of war, that now you need to be a bit cautious about electronic devices with batteries. I will say most battery, and it's a blessing and a curse, they do have microprocessor to prevent, even if the phone is badly managing them, to try to prevent those things. But this also means that they have a microprocessor, and this means they can be hacked in theory, right? And the microchip itself is embedded inside, so you don't necessarily see it. But there is one. And again, it's used for safety purpose. So you would need to hack the two components. You would need to hack the battery and the phone. But yeah, it's certainly something that I'm sure has frightening consequence. Another thing also is, of course, we have seen reaction on social media, and people are like, well, you just don't be a terrorist. Yeah, fair enough, but think about, the innocent victim, like a child that hear a phone ringing or a pager ringing and then wants to bring. I don't think a child is responsible if his father is terrorist or not. And I think there were at least one case like this where sadly the person passed away.
We can get into this now, that this is a troubling precedent for the reason that you described, in that this is not people being targeted who are very clearly, very directly, we're looking at our enemy, we're shooting at them. This is very clearly a, let's send these out into the wild. Presumably these go to the people we want to kill, but they had to have known that it would not have happened exactly in that way. And so if you just think about it, this applied to yourself. What if this had happened to your community? What if there was a situation where we have regular electronics now that are suddenly exploding? That seems like a very troubling precedent to imagine how this is basically, okay, here's a commonplace tool, and this is a weapon, this is an explosive. And you could easily imagine all kinds of scenarios. It seems like a dangerous precedent. One of the other things that you pointed out, and here I'm going to read a little bit more. I think this is from Reuters. Hezbollah urged southern residents in a statement distributed via its Telegram channel to disconnect any security cameras they owned from the internet. I think this was before all this happened. By early February, another directive had been issued to Hezbollah's fighters: no mobile phones anywhere near the battlefield. Quote, today, if anyone is found with their phone on the front, he is kicked out of Hezbollah, said a senior Lebanese soldier source familiar with the group's operations. November 12th, I think this is last year, a woman from South Lebanon received a call on her cell phone from a person claiming to be a local official. According to two sources with direct knowledge of the incident, speaking in flawless Arabic, the caller asked whether the family was home. The sources said no, the woman replied, explaining that they had traveled to eastern Lebanon. Minutes later, a missile slammed into the woman's home in the village of Beit Yohan, killing 5 Hezbollah fighters, including Abbas Raad, the son of senior Hezbollah lawmaker, and a Radwan member, the sources said. So I think I read that backward, but basically after this incident where somebody calls somebody on a phone, asks if the family is home, right? The family's not home, and then a missile gets launched at this particular dwelling. It became common practice of Hezbollah to say, hey, no phones, no more phones when you're in the fight. And you had mentioned that there was somebody high up who had earlier been claiming that the phone is the devil. And this is kind of a separate incident. So there's a weird irony. Don't know if you want to comment on that.
Yeah, so there is a video from one of the high-ranking official describing phone as the enemy within. It's interesting, and it's very haunting. I wonder also if there was maybe like adding explosive like this to a normal phone that is made by a well-known company is way harder than a pager. A pager is kind of low tech. It's bulky. You can probably unscrew it easily. It's not like a phone where it's like super tight and every space is used by something. And I wonder if maybe also there was some push, like some social engineering to push them to use pager instead of phones. Basically, like closing the trap that they were in. And yeah, I mean, for sure, like we have seen this for now a long time, right? In cybersecurity, we have seen people getting scammed through social engineering, through manipulation, through all kind of ways to push them to like drain their crypto wallet, to give access to their credit card, and all of this. And now we basically have a militarized version of that. It is just, I mean, It's just, I would say, a sad natural evolution considering what's happening. But it's, in one way, it's very surprising, but at the same time, it's also very logical next step.
On the one hand, you have a situation where people are moving, Hezbollah is moving away from their phones. And interestingly enough, here's a supply of pagers that comes in. And those pagers were clearly had explosives, it seems, added to them. So let's discuss that for a moment, that kind of setup. So a lot of people, ourselves included, have looked into the companies that have claimed to build these pagers without getting too far into the weeds and the details. Basically, as Wikipedia said, there was a shell company. It's really hard to say. Like, there was a Taiwanese company said that they said actually they were not responsible for these. So there's a lot of people saying they have nothing to do with them. What does seem to be clear is that somewhere along the line, the supply chain was controlled by probably Mossad, where they added these. But still, that would have been quite an operation to add these hidden explosives to all these pagers, and then still seem as if they were coming from an ally.
There is not much information about this company, BAC Consulting. They were based in Hungary, but it seems that the building, I think you had a friend, right, going physically there, and it's just an empty shell. There is nothing in there. And if you look at like the social media presence, what's funny is they were all very well, let's say, quote unquote, connected. You know, they had like LinkedIn account and things, but then it's like a paper tiger. Once you scratch the surface, you realize most of it was fake or people that didn't really existed. What people need to realize is even with like high brand names, it's very often the case that the device itself is done under licensing by a third party company. This is something that happen a lot in manufacturing, and basically you're a manufacturing company and you just buy the exclusive rights or certain rights to just build the device, and this is something that happen like constantly. Sometimes they are allowed to even have the same serial number, the same everything. And what seemed to have happened is this BAC company asked Apollo Devices to Apollo Gold, sorry, for such a deal. And then they started now. To my understanding, they were producing pagers to other clients. But of course, then for Hezbollah, they had those tampered just for them, right? But they were, I think they had a few other clients that got them. But you can imagine also the danger of that, right? What if during the manufacturing process, somehow they swap them with the wrong batch, you know, like, I mean, there are so many things that can go wrong in something like this, you know, and then they are sent, I don't know, in an hospital with children or something. So even that was a bit dangerous to do. The walkie-talkie is also interesting because the Japanese company basically confirmed that this is a model that is not produced at all anymore, that it's discontinued since 10 years ago. And I think for those, it might have been just counterfeiting. I could imagine that.
One of the first comments I saw on this stood out to me. And this person basically said, I forget it was YouTube, wherever. Basically, they said, this is why you don't outsource your critical military and intel hardware. And okay, I mean, the point is taken, but I mean, that's very unrealistic. First of all, we're talking about countries in the Middle East, like they cannot make this stuff. Okay, they're just struggling to survive there. They're not going to be making critical military infrastructure. And that's not really realistic in the scheme of things. We have a world that has people who specialize in making some things, and it works a lot better that way. And so people get a lot of their equipment from China and Taiwan and wherever else they get it from. So that's not really a realistic comment, although the point is understood. And we were discussing recently, Urban, the fact that the Soviet Union during World War II, in order to hold off the Wehrmacht, received a crap ton of supplies from America. In some cases, half of all their supplies of certain categories came from the United States. The United States basically created the Soviet Union and allowed them to fight off the invading Wehrmacht. So people are always relying on others. It's really unrealistic to think that somebody can just get their stuff, can just make the stuff that they would be using in their own location.
I think people should wake up a bit. Like, maybe from Hamas point of view, they were buying them from a very reputable Taiwanese company. And then the Taiwanese company said, yeah, for Middle East, we have BAC who is in charge, right? It could have been as simple as that. Now, knowing that Hamas is under sanction, this also makes it harder for them to get access directly from the manufacturing company. And maybe also from their point of view, they were just getting, Taiwanese made pagers. I think it's a very like narrow mindset when you say that, like, the whole world manufactures stuff all over the place. And even for people who say, oh, what about China? Well, China produce motherboard that then they use themselves with Intel CPU that are made in Europe and no, in US, sorry. And the machine to create those processors, they are made by a company in Netherlands. So it's all over the place. Like the supply chain of our world, they are so stretched and complex and messy.
And for example, all the African dictators who have oppressed their countries, they haven't made any of those weapons. They've imported them in some cases directly from North Korea or Russia or other places.
Yeah, totally. That's a good point. That's a very good point. I would say maybe the difference was in the past, devices and stuff were simpler, so it was harder to hide those type of things inside. I guess that's maybe the main difference. But yeah, I mean, this happened all the time.
So another thing that just things that stood out to me reading here, according to Tracy Chamon, the pagers emitted a sound to encourage users to pick the devices up and lift them to their heads. Other reports say that the device vibrated and showed an error message on the screen and only detonated when the user pressed a button to clear the error, increasing the chances that the operator of the device would be holding it.
There is still a cyber attack component to it, right? Someone had to modify the software. I don't think the software was modified remotely because those pager, they are probably unable to update themselves. Once the software is made, then it's, flashed on the memory and it's done. But they must have had a different software than the one original company made. So that's one. And then another thing is how the message was sent, how the trigger was sent. And for the pager, I mean, I think anyone can, think of, maybe there was a secret message and then the pager, once it received this very specific sequence of words or letter or whatever, then it just activated the explosive. But the walkie-talkie is less clear how they did it. Also, like simultaneously, because walkie-talkie are more like cell phone in the sense that they transmit only to each other or to the base station, but there is not really a broadcast system. I mean, it depends. Some of them have, but like to such a large scale, that also requires a lot of challenges. With those kind of testimony, I'm always cautious because it's a very traumatic event. And sometimes you need to take things with a grain of salt. Like people think they remember something that never really happened.
Yeah.
Especially in like very intense, you have the adrenaline rush. Although I would say if you look at videos of the event, it clearly rings like for several seconds. And then as soon as the person takes it and probably press a button, then it explodes. So I wouldn't be surprised of either.
Okay, we do want to talk about the broader kind of cyber attacks in this region, of which this is just one part. One thing to note, and you pointed this out, is that the pagers and the walkie-talkies are pretty useful because they actually have enough room in there to put an explosive. A thin phone would not be able to do so. So that's a very good point. Some people have suggested that, okay, so here I'm reading, Israeli intelligence services originally wanted to detonate the pagers as an opening blow in an all-out war against Hezbollah. Axios reported. Citing American and Israeli officials, they chose to act early, however, when a Hezbollah member became suspicious of the devices and planned to alert his superiors, Al Monitor reported. So potentially this was a way to distract them and then go in there for the kill, kind of a prelude to war, military tactic that is, I've never really heard of anything like this, but from a military tactic, it seems to make sense. In terms of the rules of war, Urban, I just thought we'd slip this in here. I'll just say here that the idea of the rules of war is kind of a modern invention and an invention of the West. When it really comes down to it, when two people, historically, two groups of people hate each other, they destroy the other and they kill the women and the children and destroy everything, right? Total war is the norm throughout history. And only now do we have what is called the rules of war. So the people talking about this, this violates the rules of war, et cetera, et cetera. I appreciate their ethical core, but it just seems unrealistic that, especially as civilization seems to be degrading in many ways around the world, that the idea of the rules of war is going to be something that holds somebody in check. And we might be seeing a lot more of this in the future.
I think with the advent of modern warfare and especially nuclear weapons, it became in the interest of most people to kind of find ways to de-escalate conflict, or like you still disagree with the person, you want to poke them around, but not too bad, and because you can basically destroy each other to just completely annihilate the other. The border between China and India is a very interesting case where there is regularly battles that happen, and they fight them not with guns, but with sword and with medieval weaponry, with like katanas and knives and stuff like this. It's kind of a way that you still have the fighting, you still have the physical confrontation, and you show that you don't like the situation, but you restrain yourself from using higher, because as soon as someone brings a gun, then the next one bring a bigger gun, and then bring an airplane, and then it can quickly escalate to something that is not really wanted. And I think we see this a bit. Also, there is more and more completely asymmetrical conflict in weird ways with like groups that are not really defined. It's hard to say about the rule of war, but I will say maybe Israel broke it, but I don't see Hamas respecting it either. With this happening, then people are more aware and say, you know what, maybe those are things that we shouldn't do. Sadly, I don't think now it's happening. And there is another conflict that is brewing and that is very brutal: Ukraine and Russia, and the use of drone, and especially the use of like explosive drones designed to follow a soldier and kill them. That is also something I find incredibly disturbing. But I think the other difference is now we get to see all those images. There are CCTV everywhere. Everybody has a phone. Everybody has a camera. Everybody can record. In World War One or World War Two, during D-Day or during trench warfare, the casualty were much higher, the massacre were much bigger, the injury were through the roof, and it's just you didn't see it because it was far away. There was no easy communication. So I think people are also now more exposed to war, and war is messy.
Yeah, war is hell, that's for sure. And I think that we're going to look back at the last 50 years potentially as being, ironically, among some of the most peaceful years that humanity has had. Hopefully that's not the case, but it does seem like that is certainly a possibility. Final topic here. This is not the first cyber attack, if we want to call it a cyber attack, in this region. We discussed in a previous episode the use of a autonomous AI facial recognition killer robot to kill Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, nuclear director in Iran. We've had the Stuxnet example of a computer virus on Iran's nuclear program in 2010.
Yeah, the whole region is interesting in many ways because there is kind of like this conflict between Israel and the neighbors, and this kind of like it's a bit like evolution. It forces to find like new ways, and also maybe ways that are not directly kinetical or less, to avoid like exactly what we said, a full confrontation between the two parties. Some of the interesting stuff, well, Stuxnet is, the poster child of this, this sabotage that happened, and in the Iran nuclear program. There was also Saudi Arabia was victim of an attack against Saudi Aramco, where they destroyed They use a wiper. So a wiper is a type of malware that is designed to just destroy computers. And they destroyed the Royal Saudi Oil and Petroleum Company. They destroyed their computer. And for a few days or weeks, basically there was, I think, almost no production or maybe no shipping. Like you could still produce it, but they didn't know to who to send because all the logistic was destroyed. We don't really know who did it. I mean, there are certain suspicion. There was a case of a drone attack in 2022, so 2 years ago, a drone attack against oil tanker and an airport extension in Abu Dhabi. And those were drones. And again, it's things that we don't really discuss. But I mean, if you think about it, it's like drones. They either had to be smuggled in the country or they had to fly like hundred of miles to cross like a vast distance in the desert. I mean, it just raised so many questions on how those things happen. And I mean, if you see the Houthi in Yemen, they have access to like insane weaponry. And if you look, they don't really have any manufacturing, and it's pretty obvious. They are just a proxy for bigger player in there. And finally, one last, maybe the audience is familiar with Pegasus, which is a malware that was designed to spy on phones, specifically Android and iPhones. And this was discovered. So this is made in Israel, and this was discovered not just in Israel or Middle East, but pretty much all over the world in various phones from journalists, from politicians, military officials, all kind of stuff.
To wrap things up here, this is a bizarre incident, and it's a disturbing precedent. It's also not necessarily a good tactic because, as I'm reading here, somebody in Lebanon calls this the Lebanon 9/11, right? So if you really want people to be motivated to fight against you, go and not even kill a lot of people, but just injure them, right? And have their kids killed, and put that on the newspapers in some of these countries and see how much people will fight you. So it's not even really a good military tactic now that I kind of reflect on it. Dangerous precedent. Certainly, I'm looking at the headlines of website right now, and we see that there is war certainly already happening between Israel and some of these countries. Mossad headquarters targeted, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, this is IDF commander urges readiness for possible Lebanon invasion. So this has precipitated a much bigger conflict. And I'm glad I don't live in that part of the world.
Maybe in a very tragic way, this was designed to be, the opening shock and awe of like an invasion in Lebanon. And then some of the Hamas terrorist member found out about it, which forced the other party to kind of like blew up the cover. And now it's basically triggering a ground invasion potentially. There is some tragedy into this story. But I will say something. I think this is also, it's a lesson. We should always rethink about our reliance on electronic devices. If we think more than a decade ago when Stuxnet was unleashed on the world, yeah, sure, some nuclear power plant got affected. But this was not a very advanced country technologically speaking. But it has showed what can be done. And most of those automaton, most of those devices, they are not in Beirut, they are not in Lebanon, they are in Israel, they are in Europe, they are in United States, they are in Taiwan, they are in China. So if you're a superpower, always think about what type of thing are you targeting and how many you have on your own place that could be used as a target in return.
Hey, thanks for listening. Look, I could use your help real quick. If you could share this, engage with me in some way, leave a review anywhere. This really helps me to break the technocratic shadow banning that is happening with my brand. And of course, if you really want to escape the technocracy, go to escapethetechnocracy.com. Privacy tutorial series, books, consulting, and of course, you can leave a donation. Thank you very much.